I just faced a father's ultimate, bone-chilling nightmare. The HOA president herself, a monster in a pantsuit, kicked in my door at dawn with her hired goons, then lunged for my newborn, still sleeping in her crib. Her twisted reason? A forged court order she'd cooked up after a wine-fueled power trip. But the funny thing is, the only thing truly tested that morning wasn't her fake authority. It was my self-control, the brutal discipline I'd trained for years to not rearrange her smug, lipstick-smeared smile. Let me start from the very beginning. The first sound I heard wasn't the violent splintering of the doorframe. It was the baby. Our daughter, Grace, a fragile 3-day-old life, let out a sharp, piercing cry from the bassinet next to our bed. It was a sound of pure, innocent surprise, of a perfect, tiny world suddenly shattered. My eyes snapped open. I was on my feet before my brain had even processed the noise that came next. A loud, ugly crack as our front door, the one I had painstakingly painted a cheerful blue, was kicked clean off its hinges. It slammed against the inside wall with a bang that shook the entire house. My first, stupid, primal thought was about the drywall. I'm going to have to patch that. Then the shouting started, and the world caught up. "Child Protective Services, we have a warrant. Stay where you are." The voice was female, shrill and dripping with a kind of smug, institutional authority that I knew all too well. I moved instinctively, my body remembering drills my mind had tried to forget. I put myself between the bedroom door and my wife, Kylie. She was sitting bolt upright in bed, clutching the sheets to her chest. Her face, already pale and tired from a C-section just days ago, was a mask of pure, raw terror. I saw the stitches in her belly pulled tight, and a flash of pain crossed her features. "David, what is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. I just held up a hand, a silent, unbreakable command for her to stay put, to stay quiet. I could hear them coming down the hall, heavy, clumsy boots on our new hardwood floors. More than one person, a whole lot more. They weren't trying to be quiet. They wanted us to hear them. They wanted us to be afraid. And damn it, it was working. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. My breathing was even. The training takes over. You don't think. You just do. The bedroom door flew open, and there she was, Karen Lowe, the self-proclaimed queen of our little suburban kingdom, the tyrant president of the Homeowners Association. She stood there, framed in the doorway, a monster wearing a pantsuit. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a perfect, immovable helmet. Her lips were a slash of bright red lipstick pulled back into a triumphant, predatory smirk. Behind her stood 3 men, big guys dressed in what looked like cheap, off-brand tactical gear. They wore black vests and helmets with dark visors that hid their faces. They looked less like professional operators and more like a trio of overgrown mall cops who had won a gift certificate to a military surplus store. One of them was holding a gurney, and to complete the circus, another man stood beside Karen, a scrawny weasel holding a professional-look video camera, its red recording light blinking like a malevolent eye. He was pointing it right at us. "There they are, Karen," he announced, his voice booming with fake concern for the camera. "The unstable father, the incapacitated mother, and the poor, helpless child." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "David Martinez, you are a danger to your family. We are here to rescue your daughter." Rescue. The word was so vile, so twisted in her mouth that for a second I couldn't even process it. She held up a piece of paper. "This is a court order signed by a judge. We are taking custody of the child." The man with the camera zoomed in on the paper, then back to my face, then to Kylie, who was now openly sobbing, her hands protectively covering her stomach. Grace, startled by the noise and the fear flooding the room, started wailing, a heartbreaking, desperate sound. "You can't do this!" Kylie cried out. "She's 3 days old. She needs me." Karen ignored her completely. She nodded to her 3 thugs. "Get the baby and bring the mother. She needs a full psychiatric evaluation." 2 of the goons started moving toward the bassinet. The third one, the biggest of the 3, started unfolding the gurney, its metal legs clanking on the floor. That was it. That was the line. My world weariness, the part of me that had seen the worst of humanity and just wanted to be left alone, evaporated. The fire took its place. They were not touching my daughter. They were not touching my wife. My mind went cold and clear. I saw the room not as a bedroom, but as a battle space. I catalogued the threats, the angles, the available weapons. There was a solid oak chair by the window. The lamp on the nightstand had a heavy base. The 2 goons approaching the bassinet were clumsy, off balance. The third one with the gurney was distracted. Karen was arrogant, standing too close to the action. "Get away from her," I said. My voice was low, flat. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like someone I used to be. The goons hesitated for a half-second. They looked back at Karen. She just laughed. A short, ugly bark. "Don't listen to him. He's all talk. Get the baby." The first goon reached a hand toward Grace's bassinet. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I saw Kylie's eyes widen in horror. I saw the smug grin on Karen's face. I saw the red light of the camera. And I moved. I grabbed the back of the oak chair, spun it around, and swung it hard. Not at the man's body, but at his head. The solid wood connected with his helmet's visor with a crack like a gunshot. The plastic shattered, and he staggered back, clutching his face, howling in pain. 1 down. Before the second goon could even react, I was on him. I didn't have a weapon, so I became 1. I drove forward, ramming my shoulder into his chest, knocking him off balance. As he stumbled back, I grabbed his right wrist, the one that was reaching for a taser on his belt. I twisted it, bending it back at an angle it wasn't meant to go. Bone ground against bone. He screamed, a high-pitched shriek of agony, and his weapon clattered to the floor. The third goon, the one with the gurney, finally realized what was happening and charged at me. He was big, but slow. I sidestepped his clumsy bull rush, stuck out my foot, and sent him sprawling face first onto the carpet. He went down with a heavy thud that probably shook the foundation. It took less than 5 seconds. 3 goons neutralized. Karen's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of shocked disbelief. The cameraman was frozen, his lens still pointed at the scene, capturing every beautiful moment of my little rampage. I stood there, breathing heavily, my knuckles raw. I kicked the taser away from the kneeling man and turned my attention to Karen. "Get out of my house," I snarled. But just then, I heard the sirens. Not in the distance. They were right outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the window, painting the walls in strobing colors. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies appeared in the bedroom doorway, guns drawn. "Drop to your knees! Hands behind your head! Now!" they shouted. My heart sank. Of course, Karen, the master manipulator, had planned for this. She had called them beforehand, told them I was violent, that I would resist. To them, I was the bad guy. I had just assaulted 3 men who were, as far as they knew, legitimate officers of the court. I glanced at Kylie. She was staring at the deputies, her face a mess of tears and confusion. I had no choice. I slowly lowered myself to my knees and placed my hands behind my head. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists. As they hauled me to my feet, Karen's smirk returned, wider and more venomous than ever. "See," she said to the deputies, her voice dripping with false concern. "Violent, unstable, exactly like I told you. Now please secure the child before he hurts someone else." They started to move Kylie, still in her hospital gown, onto that awful gurney. They were going to take her. They were going to take my baby. The goons wheeled Kylie's gurney down the hall and burst onto the front walk. Karen was clawing at Grace, the cameraman jogging beside her for the money shot. Right then, the navy vest stack fanned out from the convoy. A flashbang popped, and the driveway erupted in controlled chaos. I was helpless in cuffs, watching my worst nightmare unfold. But what Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my defense had started long before they ever kicked in that door. Every camera on my property, from the doorbell to the ones hidden in the eaves, wasn't just recording to a local drive. It was streaming in, real-time to a secure server. A server monitored by a few old friends of mine. The kind of friends who don't just call the police. They are the police, the very best kind. And I knew, even as they were pushing me out of my own house, that help was already on the way. Everything that happened that morning, the door, the goons, the fight, it wasn't the start of something. It was the end of a long, miserable road. A road that began about a year earlier when Kylie and I first laid eyes on this house. It was perfect. A little 2-bedroom bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street in a neighborhood called Oakwood Creek. It had a big backyard for a dog we planned to get, and a spare room that we dreamed would one day be a nursery. It was supposed to be our forever home, the place where we could finally put down roots. After years of moving from one military base to another, all I wanted was peace. I wanted to wake up in the same bed every morning. I wanted to know my neighbors. I wanted a life so boring that the most exciting part of my week was deciding what to grill on Saturday. Kylie wanted the same thing. She deserved it. She had followed me across the country and around the world, never complaining, always making a home for us wherever the Navy sent me. This house was my gift to her. A promise of a normal, quiet life. My official record listed me as an administrative officer, a neat little cover story for a life that was anything but. I was a trained operator, part of a small, specialized unit that handled the jobs nobody else could touch. We didn't wear uniforms, we didn't get parades, and we didn't leave a paper trail. My real job was to assess threats, neutralize them, and then disappear. Now, all I wanted to do was put down roots, to build a life with Kylie so boring it would be a badge of honor. It was the only thing I had ever truly wanted. We closed on the house in the spring. The first few weeks were bliss. We painted rooms, planted flowers, and met some of the neighbors. There was the elderly couple across the street, the young family with toddlers next door, and then there was neighbor Fred. He lived 2 doors down. Fred was a widower in his late 70s, a retired postal worker with a twinkle in his eye, and a story for every occasion. He was the first one to welcome us, showing up on our second day with a plate of brownies and a wealth of unsolicited but hilarious advice about lawn care. "Don't let the dandelions get a foothold," he warned, pointing a bony finger at a patch of yellow weeds. "They're like tiny little invaders. They look innocent, but they're planning a takeover." We liked Fred immediately. He was the quirky, grandfatherly figure every neighborhood should have. He was also the first one to warn us about Karen Lowe. "She's the queen bee of the HOA," he told us one afternoon while I was struggling with a new lawnmower, "and she takes the queen part very seriously." He explained that Karen had been the president of the Oakwood Creek Homeowners Association for almost 20 years. Her husband was a high-powered attorney, and they lived in the biggest house on the block, a sprawling McMansion that looked down on the rest of us. According to Fred, Karen treated the neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom. "She's got a rule for everything," he'd said, shaking his head. "The color of your mailbox, the type of flowers you can plant, the maximum allowable height of your grass. She measures with a ruler. I laughed it off at the time. I dealt with my share of petty tyrants and bureaucrats in the military. How bad could one woman with a clipboard and too much time on her hands really be? I found out a week later. We got our first official notice. It was a crisp white envelope left tucked under our doormat. Inside, on thick, embossed letterhead, was a formal violation warning. Our crime? The garden gnome Kylie's grandmother had given us as a housewarming gift. Apparently, it was an unapproved lawn ornament. According to Section C, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, all lawn decorations had to be submitted for approval to the Architectural Review Committee, a committee that consisted of, you guessed it, Karen Lowe. We were given 48 hours to remove the offending gnome or face a $50 fine. I was furious. Kylie, ever the peacemaker, just sighed. "It's silly, but let's just move him to the backyard," she said. "It's not worth fighting over." I reluctantly agreed, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. This wasn't about maintaining neighborhood standards. This was about power. The gnome was just the beginning. Over the next few months, the violations piled up. We got a fine because our garbage can was visible from the street for 2 hours after the trash had been collected. We got a warning because the brand of mulch we used in our flower beds wasn't on the approved list. I tried to talk to her once at the annual HOA barbecue. I approached her with a smile, hoping to find some common ground. "Karen," I started, "I think there might be a misunderstanding about some of these notices." She didn't even let me finish. She looked me up and down, her eyes cold and dismissive. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice like ice. "The rules are the rules. They apply to everyone. Perhaps if you spent less time questioning them and more time following them, we wouldn't have a problem." Then she turned her back on me and walked away. It was clear she wasn't interested in reason. She was a bully who got a thrill from making other people miserable. Fred confirmed as much. He told me stories of other families she had targeted, harassing them with fines and threats until they finally gave up and moved away. "She likes to pick one family every few years and make an example of them," he explained grimly. "Looks like you're this year's lucky winner." The final straw came when Kylie got pregnant. We were overjoyed. After years of trying, we were finally going to have a family. But the stress from Karen's constant harassment was taking a toll on Kylie. Her blood pressure was high. Her doctor told her she needed to avoid stress. But how could she? When every time she looked out the window, she was afraid she'd see Karen Lowe prowling around our yard with a ruler and a notepad. I knew I had to do something. The petty tyranny was one thing. But when it started to affect the health of my wife and my unborn child, the game changed. I thought her cruelty was just a personality flaw, a product of boredom and entitlement. I had no idea it was all part of a much bigger, much more sinister plan. I didn't know that our little dream house, the place we'd chosen for its peace and quiet, was standing directly in the way of her greed. The war truly began on a crisp autumn afternoon. The leaves were turning, and the air had that perfect cool edge to it. Kylie was about 6 months pregnant, and she was finally starting to relax a little. We'd had a few weeks of quiet from Karen, and we were foolish enough to think she might have moved on to a new target. We were sitting on the porch swing, talking about baby names, when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was carrying a leather briefcase and had the kind of polished, predatory smile that you only see on sharks and real estate developers. He walked right up our front path and introduced himself as Mr. Thompson. He said he represented a development firm that was very interested in our property. "We're prepared to make you a very generous offer," he said, opening his briefcase and producing a folder. He handed it to me. I opened it. The generous offer was barely more than what we had paid for the house 6 months earlier. It didn't account for the improvements we'd made, the hot real estate market, or the fact that we had absolutely no desire to sell. It was a lowball offer, plain and simple, an insulting one. I looked at Kylie. Her brow was furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry," I said, handing the folder back to the man. "But we're not interested. This is our home. We're planning on starting our family here." Mr. Thompson's smile didn't falter, but his eyes got colder. "Perhaps you should reconsider," he said smoothly. "It's a very strong offer, and I should mention that your neighbor, Mrs. Lowe, is very supportive of our project. She believes it will be a great benefit to the community." And there it was, the puppet master pulling the strings. This wasn't some random developer. This was Karen's play. "I'm sure she does," I said, my voice tight. "But the answer is no. We're not selling." The man's smile finally vanished. He snapped his briefcase shut. "A pity," he said. "I think you'll come to regret that decision." He turned and walked back to his car without another word. As he drove away, I saw a curtain twitch in the window of Karen's house across the street. She had been watching the whole time. The quiet was over. The very next day, the floodgates opened. We received 3 violation notices in a single morning. One was for a small crack in the driveway that had been there when we bought the house. The fine was $200. Another was for improperly stored recreational equipment, because our porch swing was apparently not a sanctioned form of seating. That was another $100. The third was the most absurd of all. It was a warning that the color we had painted the nursery, a soft pale yellow, was visible from the street and was not on the pre-approved palette of interior colors. I completely lost it. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a targeted campaign to make our lives so miserable that we would be forced to sell. I stormed out of the house, the notices clutched in my fist, and marched straight across the street to her house. I didn't even bother with the doorbell. I hammered on her door with my fist. She opened it a few seconds later, a look of feigned surprise on her face. "Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I held up the crumpled papers. "You know exactly what this is about, Karen," I spat. "This has to stop. You are harassing my pregnant wife. You are trying to force us out of our home. It's over." She just smiled, a cold, empty thing that didn't reach her eyes. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said calmly. "I am simply enforcing the bylaws of this community, which you agreed to when you purchased your home. If you have a problem with the rules, perhaps you chose the wrong neighborhood. My blood was boiling. I was so angry I could barely speak. I wanted to scream, to break something, to wipe that smug look right off her face. But I looked past her into her perfect, sterile house, and I saw the fear in my own reflection in the glass of her storm door. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to lose control. She wanted me to get violent, to give her ammunition to use against me. My methodical side, the part of me that had been trained to assess a situation before acting, took over. I took a deep breath, forcing the rage down. "This isn't over," I said, my voice low and steady. "You've picked a fight with the wrong person." Her smile widened just a fraction. It was the look of a predator who knows it has its prey trapped. "Oh, I don't think so," she said softly. "Some people just don't know what's good for them. But they always learn one way or another." She closed the door in my face. I stood there on her porch for a long moment, the quiet hum of the neighborhood mocking me. I had walked right into her trap, shown her my anger, and let her know she was getting to me. As I walked back to my own house, I saw neighbor Fred tending to his rose bushes. He looked up and gave me a grim, knowing look. He didn't have to say anything. We both knew what that little confrontation meant. I had just declared war, and I had the sinking feeling that Karen Lowe was a far more experienced soldier in this kind of fight than I was. I just didn't realize how dirty her tactics were about to get, or how far she was willing to go to win. After that confrontation on her porch, Karen's campaign of terror escalated from a nuisance to a full-blown psychological assault. It was clear that she wasn't just trying to annoy us into selling anymore. She was trying to break us. The violation notices became a daily occurrence, each one more ridiculous than the last. A fine for leaving a watering can on the lawn for an hour. A citation because a single shingle on the roof looked misaligned from the street. A formal complaint about excessive noise when I was mowing the lawn on a Saturday afternoon. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, and it was working. Kylie was a wreck. Every time the mail arrived, her shoulders would tense up. She stopped wanting to go for walks in the neighborhood, afraid of running into Karen. Our dream home had become a prison. I knew I couldn't fight her on her terms. The HOA was her kingdom, and the bylaws were her Bible, a text she could interpret however she wanted. Arguing with her was like arguing with a brick wall, so I started to fight her on my terms. My methodical military mind took over. I began to document everything. I bought a special ledger and logged every single notice, every fine, every interaction. I took pictures, dated and time-stamped, of our violations, the perfectly aligned shingles, the watering can that was gone an hour later. I created a file, a dossier of her harassment that grew thicker by the day. And then I took the most important step. I upgraded our home security. I told Kylie it was for the baby. With a newborn in the house, you can never be too careful, I said. And that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. I installed a top-of-the-line system with high-definition cameras covering every inch of our property. The doorbell, the garage, the front porch, the backyard, the side of the house. I even installed a few tiny, nearly invisible cameras in the eaves, pointing directly at the street with a perfect view of Karen's house. But the real genius of the system wasn't the cameras themselves. It was where the footage went. I configured the system to bypass a local hard drive and stream everything directly to a secure, encrypted cloud server. It was the kind of setup we used for remote surveillance overseas. Overkill for a suburban home? Absolutely, but I had a feeling it would be worth it. Neighbor Fred became my unofficial intelligence source. He'd wander over while I was doing yard work, always with a cup of coffee and a new piece of information. Saw Karen's husband meeting with that developer fella again last night, he'd say, peering over his glasses. They had blueprints spread out on the hood of his car. He told me stories about other families she had targeted, people who had been financially ruined by her endless fines and the legal fees it took to fight them. He told me about a retired teacher who had to take out a second mortgage to pay off the thousands of dollars in fines Karen had levied against her for having unapproved wind chimes. "She's a shark that smells blood in the water," Fred said, his usual witty tone gone, replaced by a grim seriousness. "Be careful, son. She doesn't just want to win, she wants to destroy." I'd always wondered how the old man seemed to know HOA gossip before it happened. His warnings echoed in my head as Kylie's due date approached. The stress was immense. We were trying to prepare for the most joyful event of our lives, but it was all happening under the shadow of Karen's relentless persecution. Kylie's doctor was concerned. Her blood pressure was still too high. There was talk of inducing labor early. Every day was a battle to keep Kylie calm, to reassure her that everything would be okay, that I would handle it. But inside, I was terrified. I felt like I was failing her. I had promised her a peaceful life, and instead I had led her into a war zone. Then, one night, it happened. Kylie's water broke. We rushed to the hospital in a blur of panic and excitement. All the stress, all the fear about Karen and the house, it all melted away. The only thing that mattered was bringing our daughter safely into the world. And after 18 long hours of labor, after 18 brutal hours of stalled labor, the doctors wheeled Kylie in for an emergency C-section. Grace finally arrived. She was perfect, tiny, with a full head of dark hair and my nose. Holding her for the first time, I felt a love so fierce, so protective, it was like a physical force. This little girl was my world, and I would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect her. We spent 2 days in the hospital, cocooned in that peaceful, sterile bubble. It felt a world away from Oakwood Creek and its petty tyrant. For those 48 hours, we were just a normal, happy family. When it was time to go home, I was filled with a mix of joy and dread. I couldn't wait to bring our daughter to her home, to lay her in the beautiful crib we had so carefully assembled. But part of me was terrified of re-entering the battlefield. As we pulled into our driveway, I scanned the street. Everything was quiet. Karen's house was still. There were no new notices on our door. I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the birth of our child would be a ceasefire. Maybe even Karen had enough humanity to leave a family with a newborn baby alone. We carried Grace inside, our hearts full, believing that the worst was finally behind us. That was our first and most dangerous mistake. We didn't understand that for Karen, our greatest joy was her greatest opportunity. Her silence wasn't a truce. It was the final quiet moment before she launched her most vicious attack. We carried Grace inside, our hearts full, believing that the worst was finally behind us. That was our first and most dangerous mistake. We didn't understand that for Karen, our greatest joy was her greatest opportunity. Her silence wasn't a truce. It was the final quiet moment before she launched her most vicious attack. It came on a frigid Thursday morning at dawn. The air was still and cold, with a pale winter light just starting to creep through the window blinds. We were still in bed, Grace sleeping soundly in her bassinet next to us. My eyes snapped open at the sound of a violent, shattering crack as our front door, the one I had painstakingly painted a cheerful blue, was kicked clean off its hinges. It slammed against the inside wall with a bang that shook the entire house. My first, stupid, primal thought was about the drywall. Then the shouting started, and the world caught up. "Child Protective Services, we have a warrant. Stay where you are." The voice was female, shrill, and dripping with a kind of smug, institutional authority that I knew all too well. I moved instinctively, my body remembering drills my mind had tried to forget. I put myself between the bedroom door and my wife, Kylie. She was sitting bolt upright in bed, clutching the sheets to her chest. Her face, already pale and tired from a C-section just days ago, was a mask of pure, raw terror. I saw the stitches in her belly pulled tight, and a flash of pain crossed her features. "David, what is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. I just held up a hand, a silent, unbreakable command for her to stay put, to stay quiet. I could hear them coming down the hall. Heavy, clumsy boots on our new hardwood floors. More than one person, a whole lot more. They weren't trying to be quiet. They wanted us to hear them. They wanted us to be afraid. And damn it, it was working. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. My breathing was even. The training takes over. You don't think. You just do. The bedroom door flew open, and there she was. Karen Lowe, the self-proclaimed queen of our little suburban kingdom, the tyrant president of the Homeowners Association. She stood there framed in the doorway, a monster wearing a pantsuit. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a perfect, immovable helmet. Her lips were a slash of bright red lipstick pulled back into a triumphant, predatory smirk. Behind her stood 3 men, big guys dressed in what looked like cheap, off-brand tactical gear. They wore black vests and helmets with dark visors that hid their faces. They looked less like professional operators and more like a trio of overgrown mall cops who had won a gift certificate to a military surplus store. One of them was holding a gurney. And to complete the circus, another man stood beside Karen, a scrawny weasel holding a professional-look video camera, its red recording light blinking like a malevolent eye. He was pointing it right at us. "There they are, Karen," he announced, his voice booming with fake concern for the camera. "The unstable father, the incapacitated mother, and the poor, helpless child." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "David Martinez, you are a danger to your family. We are here to rescue your daughter." Rescue. The word was so vile, so twisted in her mouth, that for a second I couldn't even process it. She held up a piece of paper. "This is a court order signed by a judge. We are taking custody of the child." The man with the camera zoomed in on the paper, then back to my face, then to Kylie, who was now openly sobbing, her hands protectively covering her stomach. Grace, startled by the noise and the fear flooding the room, started wailing, a heartbreaking, desperate sound. "You can't do this," Kylie cried out. "She's 3 days old." "She needs me." Karen ignored her completely. She nodded to her 3 thugs. "Get the baby and bring the mother. She needs a full psychiatric evaluation." 2 of the goons started moving toward the bassinet. The third one, the biggest of the 3, started unfolding the gurney, its metal legs clanking on the floor. That was it. That was the line. My world weariness, the part of me that had seen the worst of humanity and just wanted to be left alone, evaporated. The fire took its place. They were not touching my daughter. They were not touching my wife. My mind went cold and clear. I saw the room not as a bedroom, but as a battle space. I catalogued the threats, the angles, the available weapons. There was a solid oak chair by the window. The lamp on the nightstand had a heavy base. The 2 goons approaching the bassinet were clumsy, off balance. The third one with the gurney was distracted. Karen was arrogant, standing too close to the action. "Get away from her," I said. My voice was low, flat. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like someone I used to be. The goons hesitated for a half-second. They looked back at Karen. She just laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Don't listen to him. He's all talk. Get the baby." The first goon reached a hand toward Grace's bassinet. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I saw Kylie's eyes widen in horror. I saw the smug grin on Karen's face. I saw the red light of the camera, and I moved. I grabbed the back of the oak chair, spun it around, and swung it hard. Not at the man's body, but at his head. The solid wood connected with his helmet's visor with a crack like a gunshot. The plastic shattered, and he staggered back, clutching his face, howling in pain. 1 down. Before the second goon could even react, I was on him. I didn't have a weapon, so I became 1. I drove forward, ramming my shoulder into his chest, knocking him off balance. As he stumbled back, I grabbed his right wrist, the one that was reaching for a taser on his belt. I twisted it, bending it back at an angle it wasn't meant to go. Bone ground against bone. He screamed, a high-pitched shriek of agony, and his weapon clattered to the floor. The third goon, the one with the gurney, finally realized what was happening and charged at me. He was big but slow. I sidestepped his clumsy bull rush, stuck out my foot, and sent him sprawling face first onto the carpet. He went down with a heavy thud that probably shook the foundation. It took less than 5 seconds. 3 goons neutralized. Karen's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of shocked disbelief. The cameraman was frozen, his lens still pointed at the scene, capturing every beautiful moment of my little rampage. I stood there, breathing heavily, my knuckles raw. I kicked the taser away from the kneeling man and turned my attention to Karen. "Get out of my house," I snarled. But just then I heard the sirens, not in the distance. They were right outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the window, painting the walls in strobing colors. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies appeared in the bedroom doorway, guns drawn. "Drop to your knees! Hands behind your head! Now!" they shouted. My heart sank. Of course, Karen, the master manipulator, had planned for this. She had called them beforehand, told them I was violent, that I would resist. To them, I was the bad guy. I had just assaulted 3 men who were, as far as they knew, legitimate officers of the court. I glanced at Kylie. She was staring at the deputies, her face a mess of tears and confusion. I had no choice. I slowly lowered myself to my knees and placed my hands behind my head. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists. As they hauled me to my feet, Karen's smirk returned, wider and more venomous than ever. "See?" she said to the deputies, her voice dripping with false concern. "Violent, unstable, exactly like I told you. Now please secure the child before he hurts someone else." They started to move Kylie, still in her hospital gown, onto that awful gurney. They were going to take her. They were going to take my baby. The goons wheeled Kylie's gurney down the hall and burst onto the front walk. Karen was clawing at Grace, the cameraman jogging beside her for the money shot. Right then, the navy vest stack fanned out from the convoy. A flashbang popped, and the driveway erupted in controlled chaos. I was helpless in cuffs, watching my worst nightmare unfold. But what Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my defense had started long before they ever kicked in that door. Every camera on my property, from the doorbell to the ones hidden in the eaves, wasn't just recording to a local drive. It was streaming in real time to a secure server, a server monitored by a few old friends of mine. The kind of friends who don't just call the police. They are the police, the very best kind. And I knew, even as they were pushing me out of my own house, that help was already on the way. The aftermath of the raid was a chaotic blur. One minute I was in handcuffs watching my life fall apart, and the next, the cavalry had arrived. A black, unmarked van and 2 county SWAT trucks screeched to a halt. They weren't ordinary cops. Rick's unit were Reserve SEAL instructors on loan to County SWAT. Their matte black vests stamped in bold yellow navy that gleamed under the floodlights. These guys weren't cheap imitations. They were the real deal. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency that I knew well. They stacked up on my broken front door. A flashbang grenade went off with a deafening boom and a blinding light, and they flooded into the house. It was over in seconds. The deputies who had arrested me were stunned into inaction. Karen's remaining goon, the one with the gurney, was on the ground with a knee in his back before he could even blink. My old platoon mate, Sergeant Rick Downing, now the head of the county's SWAT team, ripped the phony warrant out of a bewildered deputy's hand. He took one look at it and then at Karen. "This is a forgery," he said, his voice dangerously calm. He pulled out his phone and showed it to the senior deputy on the scene. "And this is a live feed from the cameras on this house. We have video of you kicking in the door. We have audio of you admitting there's no legitimate CPS case. We also have bank transfers showing a payment from your husband's development company to this CPS agent's personal account." He pointed at the weaselly man who had been holding the camera, who now looked like he was about to be sick. The world turned right side up again. The cuffs came off my wrists and were promptly slapped onto Karen's. She didn't scream or protest. She just stared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her husband, who had apparently been waiting in his car down the street, was arrested when he came to see what the commotion was about. The goons and the fake CPS agent were all taken into custody. An ambulance arrived. Paramedics finally rolled Kylie and Grace to a real ambulance, the same driveway where the Navy stack took Karen down. Kylie was shaken and terrified, but she was safe. Grace was safe. As I watched the paddy wagon pull away with Karen and her whole crew inside, I felt a surge of triumph. We won. We had beaten her. But that victory was short-lived. The very next day, I got a call from Rick. "You're not going to like this," he said. "She's out." I couldn't believe it. Out? How? She's facing kidnapping, fraud, assault. Rick sighed. The DA's office kept stalling. Word was Karen owned him, though I didn't yet know how. Her husband's law firm posted a 7-figure bond, like it was pocket change. And the DA's office, they're dragging their feet. They're talking about this as a complex civil dispute that got out of hand. They're treating her with kid gloves. My blood ran cold, of course. Her husband wasn't just some lawyer. He was a major player in the city. They had money, connections, power. The kind of power that makes felony charges disappear. Then the second part of her attack began. It was no longer about HOA notices or even physical intimidation. It was a war for public opinion. A local news blog, one known for sensationalism and questionable ethics, posted an article titled, "Local HOA President Attacked by Unstable Veteran." It was filled with quotes from anonymous neighbors who described me as aggressive and threatening. It painted Karen as a concerned community leader who was only trying to protect a helpless child from a dangerous father and a mentally fragile mother. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, filled with lies and half-truths. My military service was twisted to make me sound like a ticking time bomb. Kylie's very normal postpartum exhaustion was spun into a narrative of severe mental illness. The story spread like wildfire on social media. Our names and pictures were everywhere. People who didn't know us, who didn't know the first thing about the situation, were leaving vile comments, calling me a monster, and Kylie an unfit mother. Our friends and family started getting calls from reporters. Even Kylie's mom, who lived 3 states away, saw the story. It was a nightmare. We had won the physical battle in our bedroom, but we were losing the war for our reputations, for our peace of mind. Karen was no longer just a neighborhood bully. She was a media manipulator, and she was using the power of the internet to finish the job her hired goons couldn't. But what they didn't know, what they never could have known, was that their new battlefield was my old stomping ground. I knew how to fight a shadow war. I knew how to turn a public narrative on its head. This wasn't a street fight anymore. This was an information war, and they just brought a knife to a drone strike. I made one call. It wasn't to Rick. Rick was local. This required a different kind of expertise, a different kind of authority. I called an old mentor, a retired 2-star general I'd worked with on a dozen black ops projects. He now ran a private security and intelligence firm that specialized in corporate and legal forensics. I gave him the whole story, from the gnome to the developer, to the forged warrant, to the public smear campaign. He listened in silence, his voice a gravelly rumble when he finally spoke. "They've initiated a psychological operation against you, son. They're trying to discredit you, to isolate you. It's a classic playbook." He paused, and I could hear the gears turning. "But they've made a fatal mistake. They've used documented, traceable channels. They've moved money, created fraudulent documents, and attempted an illegal seizure of a United States citizen. That's not a civil dispute. That's a textbook case of wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping." The HOA is just the front. The real enemy is her husband's firm. He told me to sit tight, to go radio silent. I'll handle the paperwork. You just focus on your family, and when the hammer drops, you make sure you're there to see it. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet dread and calculated hope. Rick and his team continued their local investigation, documenting every single violation notice, every threatening email, and every public statement Karen made. Fred became even more of a key asset, providing a running commentary on Karen's arrogant gloating. "She's telling everyone she's got you on the run, son," he'd say, his face grim. "She's saying you're a threat to the neighborhood, a loose cannon." But what she didn't know was that my mentor's team was building a case from the ground up, a case so airtight it would bypass the corrupt DA's office and land directly on the desk of a federal prosecutor who owed my mentor a very big favor. My family was still a wreck. Kylie was terrified to leave the house. My daughter Grace's beautiful little world had been irrevocably stained by this woman's malice, but the fear was slowly being replaced by a cold, righteous fury. I wasn't just fighting for my family's reputation anymore. I was fighting for their future. The psychological operation against us was designed to break our spirit. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't know that my spirit had been forged in a crucible of combat and honed to a razor's edge. They didn't know that every one of their little psychological attacks, every false story, every vile comment, was just more fuel for the fire. The day of the raid, I had reacted on instinct. Now I was acting with a purpose, with a methodical, cold-blooded precision that they couldn't possibly comprehend. I had spent my career dismantling larger, more sophisticated operations. The Lowe's and their small-time real estate scam were about to learn a very hard lesson about picking a fight with someone who lives for the hunt. The HOA was her kingdom, but the legal and financial world was mine, and I was about to burn it all down. The hammer dropped on a Tuesday. I got the call from my mentor's office. "It's done," he said. "The U.S. Attorney's Office has issued a grand jury subpoena, and we've filed civil charges for conspiracy, racketeering, and civil rights violations." He told me to check the front of her house at 7 a.m. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew it was going to be beautiful. Kylie and I were up before dawn, sitting in the front room. Grace was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, a perfect, beautiful world once again. At 7 a.m. on the dot, 2 black SUVs, the kind with federal plates, pulled up in front of Karen Lowe's sprawling McMansion. 2 men in crisp suits got out, not a smirk or a tactical vest in sight. They were followed by a team of plainclothes officers. They walked right up to her front door and knocked. A few moments later, Karen herself, in her morning robe, answered. I could see the confusion on her face. Then one of the agents held up a piece of paper, a real subpoena this time. He gestured toward the SUVs. She looked at them, then at him, her face turning pale. The agents walked right past her into the house. They had a search warrant. They weren't there for a chat. They were there to take everything. Documents, computers, hard drives, anything that could link her to the conspiracy. She tried to protest, her voice shrill and full of false authority, but the agents just ignored her. They had their orders. About an hour later, a different kind of vehicle pulled up to the house. It was a local news van, then another, and another. Soon, her entire front yard was a circus of news reporters with microphones and cameras. My mentor's team had released a statement to the press, detailing the federal charges being filed against Karen and her husband. The press was all over it. The story was no longer unstable veteran attacks HOA president. It was HOA president and husband face federal charges for real estate scam. The narrative had been flipped, and there was nothing she could do about it. The final poetic justice came later that day. I was sitting on my porch swing with Grace in my arms when the foreclosure notice was nailed to her front door. The developer had pulled out, the firm had cut its losses, and now the bank was coming for her house. The McMansion that had been the source of her power was now a symbol of her utter ruin. Fred, my faithful informant, came over with a cup of coffee. He just shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "Tiny little invaders, huh?" he said, gesturing to a perfectly manicured lawn. "Looks like the dandelions won this one, son." We had won, not with fists and fury, but with cold, calculated precision. We had beaten her at her own game, and in doing so, we had not only secured our own peace, but we had restored the peace of our entire community. The HOA was dissolved, the bylaws were rewritten, and a new democratic council was formed. My story became a legend in the neighborhood. I wasn't just the quiet guy who lived in the Blue House. I was the Navy SEAL who took down a corrupt HOA president. And every time I walked Grace through our quiet, tree-lined street, I felt a deep, profound satisfaction. I had promised Kylie a normal, quiet life. And after a very long and brutal war, I had finally delivered.